Music by Stir Crazy Music. www.stircrazymusic.com.
Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Welcome to the Prison Pod. Today we have Pete Bludworth joining us from Corrections Unfiltered. And I have to say it's one of my favorite podcasts right now. This is a podcast where corrections professionals come together to discuss all the latest issues, trends, and insights, along with sharing their own experiences, challenges, and successes within the field. I'd like to welcome Pete to today's show.
Thank you, ma'am. And it's an honor to be here with you because I watch your podcast and I feel it's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, I really love the idea of having you on today because there was a time when I started doing this work as a volunteer back in 1997, and these conversations would have never happened. So I really love the idea that so many of us now can come together to have conversations to address the same issues.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is reduce recidivism, for one thing, and to make the best of the time that people are in prison.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
I thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background before we talk about the podcast itself, where you started off as far as in your career in corrections.
I got out of high school. I went in the Marine Corps. That was what my family did. I did 7 years with the Marine Corps. When I was getting out of the Marine Corps, I was testing for law enforcement agencies. And when I relocated I was up in Washington State. When I relocated back to Phoenix, Arizona, they were not testing at that time. So I went back to the same job that I had before, doing the same thing I was doing before I went in the Marine Corps. And finally, that owner of that business came up and said, "Hey, you need to get out of here. You don't need to be here driving a forklift. You don't need to be here loading trucks and stuff. You need to do something with the experience you had from the Marines." So there was a federal prison up north, and so I called them up, and a month later I started working with them. It was interesting because I only planned to do it for just a moment. I think when you meet most people in corrections, they only plan to go there until the next thing comes up. But I just sort of stayed. There was a lot of camaraderie. At that time in 1990, there was not that many federal prisons, so they really relied upon that facility in Phoenix to kind of manage very difficult and challenging inmates that they didn't have the bed space for and the penitentiary levels and things of that nature. So there was a lot of camaraderie. So I sort of felt like I had gone back to something like the Marine Corps. And then I got bit by the bug of the emergency preparedness side of prisons. And I really saturated myself with that. Met my wife who worked there. We had our first child, and our leadership there said, "Listen, both of you have a lot of potential. We recommend that you go to another facility and start using this as a career." So we sat down and had that hard conversation because her family lived there, my family lived there, and we made that decision to go ahead and relocate, and then a career started. So I went and worked at a federal prison in Coleman, Florida. We activated a low facility there. Then I went to a Supermax penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, and I was there for 7 years. My wife was there, but she got multiple sclerosis. And when her body was no longer able to listen to her brain to run and do those types of things for safety, she was able to medically retire there. And then I just continued on with the path of a career. And I went from that Supermax, I was a shift supervisor, emergency preparedness officer. I went to another penitentiary in Ellenwood, Pennsylvania, where I had an opportunity to work with great people. Worked there as what they call a captain. It's a mid-level manager. And then I went from there to associate warden to a penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. Worked there for a little while, retired out of the federal correctional institution, the medium level at Florence. And then I got in private corrections. And that was sort of an awakening for me because you're around so many different influences. When you're in one system, that system. But when you're in the privates, you meet all these people from other agencies. And they've done so much and they have different ways of looking at things. So to me, I had sort of hit the professional level, so to speak, of corrections. And I just really enjoyed it. And then I was promoted to warden at two of the facilities within that private company. And then my wife's health kind of got to the point where me being a full-time warden, the number of hours that you were required to be at a facility really to be effective just was negatively impacting her. So we took a step back. We moved to Florida, where the weather is kind of better for her in some ways. Heat's not good, but we moved down here. And so I was working with that company for about a year doing fill-in warden spots here and there when they had transitions going on between their leadership and doing investigations or stuff like that nature. And then I thought, you know what, it's time to turn the reins over to other people. So I quit working with them, started this podcast, and we're just trying to see what we could do, to help support the profession of corrections.
I'm wondering if there's anything else like your podcast because I think it's pretty unique, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. Our goal was to complement what you do and the other podcasts do. And we want to have sort of a panel type approach. So many of our podcasts, there's a group of us. I have a certain co-host that I normally will invite, or we have special co-hosts that will come on if they're very specific. If they have a subject matter expert in specific areas, we'll have them come on. So we try to have a conversation, but multiple viewpoints brought into it. When it started, it was mainly just us talking, the four of us talking. And then that kind of turned into somebody else wanting to talk to us. And now we have products or we have professionals who are developing a program or something that assists corrections, and they want to come on and they want to talk about what they're doing. So they like that approach because they're not just getting my opinion or my questions, they're actually fielding questions from a group of us.
I really liked Autumn Ryan, I think was her name. She talked about So Right.
Right.
Is it
Yes,
So
ma'am.
Right?
Yeah.
So I worked in the area of drug and alcohol prevention and education, and I had concerns sometimes, and I would work with probationers that you can go into their home, and if there's drugs in the home, you can pick it up on your clothing and your shoes and everything
Right.
else. I was really amazed about that, hearing about that product because it neutralizes the fentanyl.
Yes, it uses an oxidation process to neutralize it. There's other processes to neutralize it, but they selected oxidation because it's more stable. The other processes you have to handle it. Well, then you have that opportunity for a continued exposure or new exposure. So process that they go with is oxidation, and that's what I really loved about this is we had a chance to sit with her and her team and just ask them questions, and they were
And that
able to provide us with answers. And they also said, "Hey, you've given us some things to think about we didn't think about before," and that's what the intention of the podcast is.
Yeah, yeah, and I never thought about that from seeing other podcasts that you've done, I didn't think about products that come in handy there, but
Yes, ma'am.
that's definitely one of those things that's excellent. And I wanna make mention too, you did something about visitation and the
Mm,
families and what happens with the kids, and that was a powerful. I really like that 'cause
thank you.
next season, I'm focusing on families and children as much as I can, and that really hit home, that one.
Oh, thank you.
So one thing I want to say about your podcast that really impresses me is when a lot of us who started 30 years ago in this field as advocates and volunteers, you guys were the man and we were the others. It was us and them. And one of the hardest parts when I started going back to school and dealing with people that worked in corrections was to break down that wall myself
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I noticed I had built that wall up and I didn't want that. So, what's remarkable about your podcast is you are all people that have been in various areas of corrections in the field and you're having real conversations. It's not all business. You're talking about the real things, such as just recently, I'm sorry to bring this
Yeah.
up, but there was a death recently. You did
Yes,
an
ma'am.
excellent job covering that and talking about that, giving respect to the families, and all of you did a really good job discussing what happens. The thing I felt the most on that was the emotion in there, the feelings. We have a tendency to look at certain people in our society, corrections officers, people that are wardens, people that oversee corrections as hard and uncaring and unfeeling. And your podcast breaks that barrier. So I
Well, thank
applaud
you.
you for that.
Thank you. That was a challenging one because we weren't sure if we should do it so close to the time that it happened. But I had a friend, it was just interesting. A person a few days before that had reached out to me and said, I just started watching your podcast. I had no clue about anything that goes on in prisons. And I'm really learning about what happens. So when that incident took place, I got with the guys and I said, "Hey, I just really feel strong about this because people don't know what goes on after that happens. They don't know how it affects the inmate population. They don't know how it affects the staff. And in there, the two have to be able to get along. And there's sort of a respect level that both sides will give, and not one side can push it too hard on the other. And it's an extremely emotional time frame at that facility, and it's not going to go away for a long time. But if we could just help give some information, say, hey, here's what's happening right now. here's everything they're going through, trust in the process and the system, then hopefully we helped benefit that situation. And I appreciate your kind words, because that's what we were hoping to do, was give information that people can say, all right, I understand something happened. This is what's going on at that facility. And they are aware of the fact how this is impacting not only the staff, but also the inmate population.
Right. Because we talk a lot about trauma that people go through during their incarceration, but we don't address the trauma that happens to the staff as much.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that, it would be really good to be able to see some type of trauma work between the staff and the inmates at some time.
Yes, ma'am. There are some programs that I've seen at other facilities where there's an opportunity for staff and inmates to share, different types of situations or different ways that they react to things and why they react that way. There is this thing in corrections, though, that has to be understood, and that is there are manipulative inmates in the situation or in prisons that are going to do what they can to get the advantage on an employee. And we have to teach our staff to have those barriers and those safeguards in place, because of the fact that they came there for a career, they came there to provide for their families and stuff. So we do what we can to be careful of that particular element. However, there's also the much bigger majority are trying to do their time, do it the right way, and they will benefit for certain interactions with staff. Is unfortunately, because of the environment, there is always going to be that guardrail put in place to make sure that it doesn't go too far.
I like Percy's Pizzer's thing. We have to use common sense.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's not too common. It's not always too
No,
common.
it's not. I'd like to ask you, during your career, what's your favorite part of the job that you can think of? What did you really enjoy doing?
I really enjoyed being a shift supervisor, and that's because you're more intimately involved with the staff members and the facility and how the inmates interact. And when I did it, I was a shift supervisor at a low level facility, which I, coming from a highly active medium level, going to a low level was a wholly different environment. There, in the medium level, there wasn't a lot of emotion shared by the inmate population. It was anger. It was a lot of anger, or it was a lot of taking advantage of situations. At the low, they want to talk to you. They want to communicate. So I had to make that transition. That when I went to the Supermax, it was a whole different environment, but it was like the high end of respect. You have to respect them, they have to respect you type thing. So it was interesting for me. So learning those interactions and how I can make a successful shift for staff it was something I really looked forward to and I enjoyed. Now, moving up the ranks, obviously you have more opportunity to have a bigger impact on facilities because your decisions are more broadly spread across the entire facility, or if you're an assistant warden, you're over a group of departments versus just one department. That was interesting because I think after my experiences, and I don't want to make this sound childish, but there's a maturity level that comes with it. And you start to understand the greater good, and you start to understand that what certain decisions can mean, not only for the staff, but also for the inmate population. And then when you make warden, you realize your decisions also impact the community. So I enjoyed that learning process of it. But if I had to go back and just do one, it's going to be shift supervisor.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
Yes, ma'am.
interesting because there are so many, and from facility to facility, it is so different. And as you mentioned, federal to
Yes,
state
ma'am.
is different, county jails to prison, and Supermax obviously has a whole nother feel to it.
Yes, ma'am.
I did a lot of my work at the Supermax here in Maine,
Okay.
and it was definitely a different feeling walking in there than it was some of the lower level facilities.
Yes, ma'am. I think when you work those facilities, when you get to those higher level facilities, higher custody level, they're not going anywhere. So there's your options for them to transfer or things of that nature. It just doesn't happen. So as long as you keep your barrier up and you don't get overly emotionally involved, you sort of get used to each other. And there are certain things that some people will say, oh my gosh, but actually your relationships are so good that you can work your way through that with the inmate population as far as misunderstandings or thoughts of disrespect and things of that nature, because they get to know you, you get to know them, and you can kind of work through things differently. But it's a different type of communication when you're talking with them. It's not as much because they're curious about what everybody else is listening to. So you got to be careful with your words, careful how much attention you give. But they get the point, that little extra interaction meant that you're going to be able to work through this. And the same thing for them. If they actually turned to you and nodded their head, you knew not to talk to them, but you just knew to nod your head back. And that was their way of saying everything's going to be all right if we keep on this same course. And you're saying, yeah, it is. So there's that respect level. So I did really appreciate those opportunities. But yes, ma'am, that's why it's so important for staff to understand the environment and be able to work on their communication. So that way we can alleviate a lot of the misunderstandings or the tension that goes on.
I think a lot of your conversations too that you have help families that have members coming home because, you know, there's a lot that you don't understand, like that supervigilance and the heightened arousal, smell and color and any of that.
Hmm.
Those are things that we don't think about, and those are things that can set somebody off real easy,
Yes, ma'am.
when they come home. So I think these conversations are really important, and I love the fact that we can have them.
There has been a lot of in my later years in the corrections, there was a lot of focus, and I'm glad we did it, to where you began to invite family members to the facility when an inmate made a major goal. They got their GED, got a high school diploma if that's what they had arranged with the local community, or they got a degree, whether it's a bachelor or an associate's or whatever. There was these times to celebrate, bringing the families in to do that. I had a gentleman one time and pretty tough guy. He never let his guard down. He was always on that high alert for himself. But when he got that diploma, and his child was there, who was, if you don't mind, I got two stories. His child was there to see him wear a cap and gown, and the family pulled me aside. I was walking through, minding my own business. I think I was even wearing the same jacket, and he said, "Can we talk to you, Warden?" I'm like, "Sure." And they said, "My daughter is now saying that she's going to graduate high school so she can have a picture in a cap and gown like her dad." Impactful, impactful. If you don't mind, one more, and I'll make it quick. Young gentleman, a lot of energy. He had a lot of energy. He's constantly in trouble. And we kept trying to talk to him, like, why can't you just get yourself together? Why can't you stop doing these other things? And this warden that I worked for, he said, "Hey, we just graduated 9 people, whatever people out of GED. So let's take these, then buy them all pizza, and we're going to get them their own pizza, and we're going to get them their own 2 liter bottle of soda, and we're going to put them right in the middle of the chow hall, and everybody who comes in the chow hall is going to see them eating their pizza and drinking this 2 gallons or this soda pop." We did it. I thought, well, this is interesting. About a month later, I'm walking in the hallway and this inmate stops me and he says, "Hey, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." He says, "I want one of the pizzas. What do I got to do?" I said, "Well, you got to get your GED." Months later, he gets his GED. He stops me again in the chow hall. He says, "Hey, can I talk to you?" He says, "I want to tell you something." He said, "Last night, I actually did homework with my daughter who's in grade school for the first time. I was able to help her with her homework." He said, "I now know what it means to be a dad." Was that pizza worth it?
Thank you.
Was that
Beautiful.
pizza worth it? Sure was.
Nala pizza.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is one thing about the tablets and being able to visit, doing the virtual visits, that is so important because a dad can actually do that face to face with their child in a visit
Yes.
now. And, a lot of people had, their own opinions about tablets and they're watching video games and movies all day, but I don't think they realize all the programming that's on there and the communication that it opens to families and lawyers and counseling, virtual counseling. There's so much that can be done in the future with the tablets.
Yes, ma'am. I've been at facilities where there were no tablets, and we converted with tablets. And the benefit the tablet gives is great, is exactly what you said. It gives them their opportunities to program. It's right there with them. They can engage when they're ready to engage versus they're not ready to engage. Now they got to go to a class or they have to do something. We're all like that. All of us are like, sometimes we just don't feel like participating, but we have to. Here they're able to engage when it's the opportunities there, but also the communication with the family. And as a management situation, it's one of those, as long as you're behaving and you're doing the things you're supposed to do, the tablet's accessible. Now you start changing your situation by doing the things you're not supposed to do. Now you got to go to that telephone. Now you got to wait for your visiting because the tablet's no longer a resource for you. But if you straighten things around, you're going to get that tablet back. So I see it both ways. But what I really appreciated about the tablets after we incorporated them was the engagement that the inmates had with the programming that was available when they were ready to consume it.
Yeah, my first couple of years, I had no idea who was listening. And then 2 years ago, I found out I had 77,000 listens. And I was like, wow,
Wow.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And now we can follow our stats on Adobo, and I've had 330,000 complete listens and
Wow.
over
That's
a half a
outstanding.
million starts. So, and of course, with me, I have an address that they can write. So a lot of my podcast shows come from suggestions of the listeners,
Oh, okay.
something they're struggling with in prison or questions they have about when they go home. What direction should they go? Who should they contact? And then I try to find a guest that will address that. because I can't possibly write back to everybody.
Yes, ma'am. What a great service. You provide a great service because they absolutely need that. That's been something that I believe, I'm doing this prison reform series on our podcast, and we're
Yeah.
realizing that there was a cutoff, so to speak, when they went from parole to supervised release for the federal agencies. And a lot of states mimicked the same type of thing. They just call it different names. There seems to have been a cutoff between supporting a person that's transitioning into the community once they get to the community. Now it's quicker just to send them back. And there's going to be that lapse of time where some small mistakes are made. And we've got it used to be they would work with them to get through the small mistakes. Not big mistakes, that's different. New crimes, things of that nature. But I think we do have to understand that reentry is not just this clean slate. They walk out and off it goes. There's going to be some stumbles. There's going to be some trips that go along with it. And corrections, as well as probation parole, they need to be there to help support that. That's why it's so important for corrections to understand and communicate with that parole side, is because we don't want to just turn a person over cold to them that they don't even know or understand. There has to be that transition period that has to be, both parties have to be a part of it.
I've just been thinking about some things that I can do with this probation officer office is almost in my neighborhood. I could
Mhm.
almost walk there. I've often thought about different programs that they could do at the probation officer office itself, like uh, first Monday of the month coffee, where you actually have coffee and donuts and you have people talking with them in a social type. I think people would be more open to their probation officers. I also think the whole idea that when you have a group of people that are all dealing with the same thing, they're all coming home and trying to deal with it, and they're not supposed to have anything to do with each other.
Yeah.
That's, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, if that's all you've known for 20 years, how do so some of those gaps I think need to be filled in.
And they're returning back to the same area that generally has the same problem, or it's been
Exactly.
magnified. And sometimes the element that's looking for them to come back is not the element they need. And those
No.
influences immediately come back and those impulses are there. And that's I've had people ask me before, where do I think the failure is? And I think there has to be an understanding that prisons can't do it all. You can't make the person participate. And even if you do get them to the classroom, you can't make them actually transition their thought processes or work on their thought process,
Mm-mm.
make better decisions. You can't. So that's why I was brought up with the tablet. They're as consuming the information probably when they're more ready to consume it, or it can support the classroom information when they're ready to consume it. Some people are up all night long. That's when they study better. But the onus falls on the inmate to actually participate and put the processes in place and work through them. I had people tell me, "Well, I'm not going to take the class until the last possible minute," and we would tell them, "You're the type of person that needs to practice this a whole lot longer than 3 months before. You need to get on this 12 months before because you've got a lot of rechanneling to do with your thought processes."
A lot of people that I work with now that have done time that are now working in reentry, their big thing is reentry starts the minute you walk through the door of the prison. That's when it should start in your brain.
Yes, ma'am.
you know,
Yes,
with
ma'am.
my big thing was reading. Pick up a book. And I had people tell me, well, I can't read very good. Well, do you have kids? Oh, yeah, I've got 2, 3 year olds. Pick up a Mary Poppins book, the simplest thing you can find,
Yeah.
and just practice reading those and then read it to them on the phone,
Mhm.
and
Yes, ma'am.
so and it doesn't matter what you read. It can be a comic book. The whole thing is that practice of reading increases your skill of reading, it increases your vocabulary, gives you self-assurance, and it does open other doors so that you have some faith in yourself to be able to pick up a book and start
Mhm.
doing something.
Yes, ma'am. I agree. And that's why it was so important for library services to be provided,
Yes.
whether it's going to be, a local library in the facility, a centralized library versus, some that are book carts. I worked at one facility that was book carts went to all the cell houses. That's fine. And what you find is most of the time, the inmates actually take care of those books because they realize it's a shared resource. They like it and they don't want to do something that's going to damage another inmate's ability to or harm another inmate's ability to participate in it. But yes, ma'am, that reading is very important too because it sets a pattern of being able to focus. And then that's going to help with all the other stuff, all the other programming that goes on to be able to focus.
We were really lucky here in Maine. We started a book program and we got personal books. So they allowed us to order books that, of course, it had to be from a accepted vendor. So they could request a book and we could send it to them so it was their own personal books. And I had somebody who was 35 years old tell me they never owned a book. This was
Wow.
their first book they owned. And I thought, well, that's really something to think that, and it was I don't remember what it was. I think it was a fantasy comic type
Yeah.
book, but still.
Very important.
Speaking of books, are you a reader? Do you like to read?
Yeah. Since I started the podcast and there's so many people that want to talk and they've written a book. So I kind of search around and say, okay, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to read that book. So I've started doing it recently. I can't say that I've done it for a long period of time.
Yeah. If you're ever looking for a list, I have a bunch, so I could
Okay.
recommend some to you. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So now with your podcast, are you doing it seems like you're doing 2 or 3 a week. How many are
Yeah.
you're
I
doing a lot.
I've done a lot of research on how to go about it, and there is the thought process of scheduled ones that go out. But I wanted to do quick growth, and I wanted to get better because I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable behind the camera or behind on the microphone thing. So I thought the best way to do that is just knock them out. So I sort of open it up to people's availability, and I go through periods of time where I have several people reach out and say, "Hey, I want to do a podcast with you." And so then when do you want to do it? And then we just work our way through. And then now I'm sort of hitting a cycle now where there's going to be 2 or 3, maybe every 2 weeks or so. We have some interesting ones coming up, and they're very in-depth conversations. And I want to be very careful and deliberate in how we give the information out because it's important and meaningful information. But some people will feel differently about it. But we're we're going to be talking about the previous riots that took place that kind of shaped the way the corrections mindset is today. It's the history is what brought us to today. And there's some very important things that are happening today that took place years ago. And we said we'd never do that again, but we're doing them. So we want to talk about that conversation. So
Wow.
we want to be very deliberate with that. So we're kind of slowing things down because I want to make sure we're more measured and more deliberate about what we're saying. Also, like the companies that come on that want to talk to us, like the virtual patrol guys at the camera system.
Amazing.
What a product there. Total safety. That is a product that is totally designed for the safety and welfare of the inmates and the staff. It sees everything the same. But I want to make sure I give due process to them and I actually put the right information out, that I get the right illustrations or the pictures to add to it, definitions to explain things. So now that I kind of got that, the grind over with, so to speak, now I kind of want to get more determined and measured with what we're doing.
Yeah, like I said, I really have enjoyed the subject matter that you have, and
Thank you.
it's just you've covered so much. I have a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am.
It's always a touchy subject because, it's trauma related and the topic itself, but I get a lot of letters from people that are in on a sex crime and they want more information on the registry, along with people on the outside who have, I mean, there's fears around people who have a sex offense. And I don't know that it should be any more of a fear than anyone else who commits another crime. But I think that there's so much misunderstanding around how someone's on the registry, how long they're on the registry, what types of offenses get you on a registry. There's a lot of misconceptions around it. So that's just a suggestion for a
Okay.
future topic.
Yes, ma'am. Appreciate it. We'll take a look at that. Definitely, you're right. It's going to be a very sensitive subject to speak about, and one we would definitely have to be measured in how we present it to make sure that people know that we're presenting it in a way that it needs to be heard versus opinions and other
Right.
things being thrown in there.
Yeah.
There's a fact to it also. We'll just lay that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it would really be a very important subject, especially coming from people that work in the field and see the statistics and the programs that are or are not available.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So let me see. I don't know where I want to go next. Did you have any questions for me?
No, I really appreciate, the information that you work on and the guests that you have because it helps give me some insight because throughout my career I've had opportunities to get to know an inmate or get to know briefly family members, what family members go through, support, things of that nature. So it kind of gives me an insight that I wasn't going to get another way. I've had relationships, like I said, we've always kept guards up. working the higher end facilities, the inmates are keeping their guards up also. So it's
Sure.
sort of a mutual thing. And that's where I spent the majority of my time, especially the later years of my career in corrections, was spent at the higher end facilities, higher custody levels. So I really appreciate the content that you're putting out because I listen to them and I get a different perspective of things on how I might view something. Or even on my podcast, I can bring up a point or a question based upon something that has been presented on your podcast. So I appreciate that. I will, if you don't mind, I would like to say that I believe that corrections on both sides is a misunderstood profession as well as a misunderstood community. And it's understandable to me because I was part of corrections since 1990. And so I understood why we did not give out a lot of information and why we kept a lot of things close to our chest, so to speak, when it came to community knowledge or putting anything out for the public to see and hear. But I just believe now we need to take it to a different level. Podcasts like yours, Mike Cantrell's with the Prison Officer Podcast, hopefully ours, our podcast where we can begin to let the public know more about what goes on inside the facility because it does affect both communities as well as the staff community and the inmate community. And I believe that the vast majority of the inmate population want to know how staff are impacted, just like they want staff to know how they're impacted. And I think that over my last years in corrections, I tried to focus on more of that understanding, taking the deep breath before a reaction when possible. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you just got to, but take that deep breath and maybe get other influences to talk to you and give you different ways of looking at things. And also the one area I want to move into this next year with Corrections Unfiltered is this thing with private corrections and the bad name that they have, the stigma that they have. And I wasn't sure when I went into private corrections how it was going to be, right? Because I heard all the same things. But I can tell you my experience was you have agencies that have limits on how long a person can work with them as far as age goes, an age limit. And what you find is they're just hitting their stride. They're really just getting good at what they were doing. And then they can no longer work again. And private corrections gives that opportunity for those levels of people to go and have a second career, so to speak. I had great leaders in the federal system. I'm not saying I didn't. When I got into privates, I hit a league of wardens or other levels of managers within a state system or a county system that just saw things a little bit different, that really brought intrigue along. And I think that the private industry doesn't get that benefit. They're not about making money. They're about spending money smart. And I can give you an example if you don't mind.
Oh, go
So
ahead.
when I was in the feds, everybody knows whenever December's coming, you're gonna be spending money, right? End of fiscal year. And they call you up, you got 140 grand to spend it. And you're buying. So I get into privates and my first facility, we had an issue going on with one of the security devices. Someone told me it's this problem and it costs $2,500. So, all right, get the new part in, let's go. Well, it wasn't that problem. So they install it, doesn't work. I get a phone call from the boss and he says, "Hey, Pete, I understand you bought that $2,500 part for that fence." I said, "Yes, sir." "Did you know for $250, you could have somebody come out there, do a diagnostic and tell you exactly what was wrong with that fence?" I said, "I did not." He said, "Pete, we just spend money smart. I don't mind you spending it. Just spend your money smart." And I can tell you, I was at a facility and something, as you can manage it. It's not easy to manage, but you can manage it. The boiler went out. So 300 and some odd inmates were going to go without hot water. The private companies brought in a temporary boiler for 3 days. I signed off on the bill and it was well over $50,000. You know why they did that? Because it was the right thing to do. So could they have said, "Hey, warden, figure it out"? Sure. And then we would have to figure out to tell 380 people, there's a chance you're not going to get hot water for several days. But instead, they had it installed. It was installed on a Friday, taken out on a Tuesday because we were able to fix the problem on a Monday. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what they truly are about. I think the knowledge level and the professional level is not really understood, and the benefit that you get by taking these seasoned veterans and they be able to bring them into a system and work collectively is there. And I think it's just a misunderstanding. Not there. Yeah, the government should operate the same way they do. They just protect money. They just make sure when you spend it wisely. But at the same time, when it comes to welfare and the quality of life type things, they'll spend every penny they got. They absolutely will. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I have a question. Federal prisons, do they have inmate benefit funds?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We've always wondered, what do they use that money for?
They use it for a lot of the recreation equipment and all the types of stuff that are like leisure books. right? That's how they're going to be getting things for the library. It could be their tablet system. It's going to be for those types of things that benefit the entire population. So there's generally, now I've worked for several, I was private, but I was contracted. I worked for facilities contracted by states. So they regulate that to make sure that it goes strictly to what it goes to 100% of the inmates. You know, if one group says, hey, we want this kind of guitar, and another group says, no, we want that one, they're probably going to buy both guitars, but it's going to come out of that fund.
Okay. I was just curious on that.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm wondering, is there a way that we can open up the conversation with our communities about bringing people home? Is there any way that we can learn, maybe even between our podcasts, of ways to reduce the stigma, not in my neighborhood, rather than, I'd love to have you come home and join our group or participate in our community garden?
Yes, ma'am. I was part of working at a facility where they were working towards just that. And it takes education in the community and trust. So you have to build that trust. So the community understands that you as the facility are doing what you can to provide the information for the person to make meaningful change. And and you have that's something I want to work on is there's a system in which you can review that before they release. Now, when a date comes, the date comes, they're getting out. But if we can build that confidence in the community, the facility is providing those things, and the facility is measuring the value of the reentry training, the programming that they're providing. I think that will go a long way. And that's what that particular area when I was working was trying to do. They were trying to communicate through the labor department, the local community labor department, state labor department, and they were trying to work within the different hospitality professions or the other profession, carpentry, going out to work construction sites and educate the employers. And then hopefully from the employers, they began to educate the rest of the community. And that was going to be through, just that town hall meetings that they have or different types of meetings the community has to get information out. And I think that's what we have to do. You have to educate the community on what the facility is doing and give them the assurance that you're measuring success and that person, when they leave, has been offered it, they participated. Now, when they got out, and this goes back to what I said before, when they get out, they have to prove it. They have to get out and they have to understand there's going to be some of the same old people around, some of the same old stigmas going on, or some of the same old opportunities set, and they have to show that they're making better decisions. It's not going to be easy for all of them. It's going to be tough for most, but I think over time, you will begin to build that confidence.
Yeah. I think there's basic things too that, we should really push with some people. Like, if people think 3 o'clock, you need to be there at 3 o'clock, you're on time if you're there at 3 o'clock. And I've heard people say, if you're on time, you're already late. So one of my biggest suggestions to the guys that I work with is be at least 10 minutes early to your job. Always.
Yeah.
It's
It's interesting you say that because at one of the facilities, we were graduated, it was a big class. We graduated GEDs. I mean, there was a bunch of them. There was probably 40, 50 inmates because they saved them up over time, had one big celebration. And I was the assistant warden. As they came up, they were shaking my hand, but they wouldn't look in the eye and they didn't really shake. They just kind of stuck their fingers out. And I stopped and I wasn't sure if this was the right move, but I stopped and said, oh no. And the family members were there. I said, oh no. You have to know how to shake a hand. So we talked about look people in the eye and the proper grip, how you actually ensure you have a proper grip. And we talked about that. I actually had family members come up to me and inmates later on, stop me on the yard walking across and say, hey, I really appreciate you doing that because no one has ever taught me how to shake a hand. Later on, it played out to where we were doing the same kind of thing with the graduation. And it was job interviews. And we brought in people from the community to do practice job interviews. And the inmates didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to look them in the eye. One of the toughest questions they had to answer, where have you been for the last 7 years? Your resume stops in this year. That's 7 years ago. Where have you been? And they were dumbfounded. They didn't know what to say. So we regrouped. I had great staff where they said, what, we need to regroup and we need to teach them how do you answer that question? How do you tell them? Well, I was incarcerated for a period of time, but during that incarceration, I did all these wonderful things to make myself better. And that fills that gap in. And we had to teach them, though, how to actually talk and communicate on interviews. So many of those little steps are so important along the way. And I'm sure there are a lot of places that do, and they do a really great job with that. But I do believe, going back to what you talked about, you brought up, is we do have to go back to understanding when it comes to releasing inmates, it could be that basic as not knowing how to shake a hand.
Yes, exactly. And there's basic life skills that if you go in, especially if you end up going in the juvenile system, and you graduate to the adult system, you've missed out all those formative years. I mean, and that's why you have people that come home and they still eat like they're eating out of commissary because they've never learned how to cook or never learned how to shop.
I was
So
working at a facility, and this one inmate used to say to me all the time, "You can't take away my air. You can't take away my air." And I was sitting with a psychologist, and she was a wonderful lady. I was going to say, "Hey, doc, why does this inmate keep saying this to us?" And she said, "What I want you to do, I want you to walk around, and I want you to pat search at least 20 inmates, and I want you to ask them the question on when they were incarcerated, and I want you to tell me next week what you find out." I said, "Yes, ma'am." Right. I follow my orders. I went out and I did that. Next week, she and I were sitting there. I said, "Oh, by the way, hey, I did that." She says, "Well, good. What'd you come up with?" I said, 14. She said, "What I want you to understand is that is where their learning has shut down." He says, "You're talking to a 40-year-old person, but they're thinking with a 14-year-old mind. Stop thinking that they're going to come up with these, great logical ways or this fact finding stuff, or they're really going to be able to work through, difficult problems. They don't know." Changed me. That conversation with her changed me because I began to think, you know what? I got to stop thinking that I'm talking to a person who has all these life experiences because they don't. They have prisons experience. And so I think that really helped me out. And so I share that conversation with new employees or other employees when they say they're having a hard time. I'm like, well, tell me about it. They start telling me, and I say, let me share a little conversation I had one time because hopefully that helps them understand. Sometimes you have to talk to them at their level in a polite, professional way, and you'll get more out of it than trying to go above their head, because then I could even give them another sense of failure. Well, I can't even have a conversation with this person because I don't understand what the heck they're talking
exactly.
about.
Yeah.
So there's so much to that communication element, isn't there? And
Yes.
and then when you
And the
tell staff to have
language.
guardrails,
Our
yes,
language we use, this is one thing that really bothered me when I sat through a couple of juvenile court hearings when they ask people, "Well, you have no remorse?" And then after we come out of the courtroom, they say, "I don't know what remorse means."
yeah,
And then
right,
it's on their record. They had no remorse.
yeah. There has to
So
be that
something that
understanding.
right, right,
Yes, ma'am.
and that's where these conversations are so great that we're having, all of us
Yes,
that
ma'am.
are doing this work.
Thank you.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to bring up before we close out?
No, ma'am. I think we've touched on it all. I really appreciate you, letting me, talk about the conversations as far as, private corrections and stuff like that and give my viewpoints. Because what you do is very, very important. And I think that if we can understand, if through your podcast, my podcast, we can build an understanding that communication is key and critical, that respect has to go both ways. And that we have to understand that our profession brings certain guardrails and certain things to protect our employment and our ability. And we have to understand that there are certain things on the same side that inmates have to, to protect, that will be able to advance things further in a respectful way and in a way that we can at least come back and have a conversation versus demonstrating things through behavior. Because like we talked about, I believe it was off camera, sometimes that behavior can lead to very tragic things. Both sides of the
Exactly.
of the profession. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, I want to remind people that we've been talking with Pete Bludworth today with Corrections Unfiltered. If you have not checked out the podcast, please do. It's on YouTube. I believe this morning I saw 154 videos up there.
Something like that.
So
Yes, ma'am.
Pete's been really busy and there's some great topics. I've just been very happy with what I've been seeing. The virtual patrol officer, if you want to check one out right off, check that one out because
Thank
it
you.
is amazing and it's very interesting.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me, Valerie, because I've been watching your stuff and I've been wanting to have this conversation. I'm glad that we actually had it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pete, and thank you for all the work that you're doing and to help break down these barriers and stigmas that we can have around corrections.
Thank you, ma'am. And you got your challenge going.
Yes, mine's sitting right here on my
Yes, ma'am.
desk.
We're shared now. We have a shared thing.
It's my good luck charm.
Well, good. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, we'll be back in another week with another edition of the Prison Pod.
Attention! Choreo, a better way to connect with loved ones who are incarcerated. Without Choreo, family and friends wait for a call and hope they can answer. With Choreo, inmates can call or message at any time. When your inmate calls their Choreo number, they will hear your voice and text messages. Inmates receive and leave messages at any time using standard prison phones, making connection easy and predictable. For information about Coreo, visit coreo.org. Stay connected.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.